I'm so excited you're joining me today because we're going to talk about a timely topic, the differences between narcissism and autism. I've been seeing a disturbing trend lately that narcissistic individuals are claiming that they're autistic, and that there's even getting wide support where psychiatrists and other types of mental health professionals are also saying that there's actually not the high rate of narcissism, that it's actually undiagnosed autism. Now, I'm autistic. I just want to say that up front, that I'm a late diagnosed, high masking autistic woman. And all my sons are autistic, so I live in a pretty autistic world. And I understand why there's this struggle to identify the differences between narcissism and autism. But I think this is a disturbing trend because if somebody's a narcissist and they claim to be autistic, they're going to then hurt a vulnerable community that actually has real disabilities and deficits. And on top of it, it's going to confuse individuals on whether an autistic person is struggling with a disability versus when it's actually someone who's manipulative and abusive who's attempting to gain control. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this. This is going to be a fascinating topic. I hope you strap in. I want to cover several areas today. And I also want to right now off the top give a shout out to my two moderators on YouTube, Audrey as well as LT. So thank you so much for being here and for helping us create a very safe community. If you have any questions, they're going to be engaging in the comments before I get to the end stage of this discussion. But for the first part, let me kind of tell you where we're going to go. We're going to first talk about why narcissists may be masquerading as the autistic. What are the benefits of it? Then we're going to talk about the key differences between narcissism and autism. And we're then going to wrap it up with talking about, can narcissism co-occur with autism, and how do you know when they're both presenting, when their both conditions are happening at the same time, because it is very possible to have them. And just some final thoughts about how to differentiate narcissism from autism if you're actually questioning that with somebody that you love. And then we'll wrap up with the last 15 minutes of this discussion by taking your questions about whatever it is that you're interested in. So I hope that you'll hang around for the whole episode so we can get into autism versus narcissism. So why might a narcissist want to masquerade as an autistic person? Well, first of all, autism there's more support, there's more emotional leniency and understanding because of the social as well as the sensory limitations that autistic people have. And so narcissists may be attracted to claiming being autistic. So let me say that again, kind of make sure I can say all that, because all the ticks, all the labels here are throwing me off. So a narcissist may be tempted to claim autism because they want to excuse harmful behavior. Narcissists also struggle with interpersonal relationships, not because they don't sense what's happening. They're not struggling to read the social cues. Actually, they're very good at reading the social cues, but they lack empathy and they struggle with emotional regulation. They often have a difficulty taking responsibility for their actions. And so by claiming to be autistic, they're reframing their coldness, their aloofness as a neurological problem rather than a character flaw. And what they're also doing is justifying the lack of that emotional reciprocity in a relationship. The way that you feel emotionally starved because they don't really show up. They're offloading that and claiming it's just how their brain works. It's not their fault. They don't mean to be doing that. This is really a deficit related to a disability, not actually due to their coldness or problems with empathy. It also allows them to avoid consequences for being cruel and dismissive, for being manipulative, because you can just say, oh, it's because I have a social problem. I'm not very good at reading social cues, which is a really great way to avoid the consequences of their harmful behavior. So that's point number one. It excuses harmful behavior. Point number two, it's a great way to avoid accountability. Narcissists don't like to admit fault. So by claiming autism, they're able to dismiss your accusations of manipulation and gaslighting as just a misunderstanding. It's caused by the neurodivergence, not because they actually are being manipulative and deceiving you. They should just say, oh, it was an accident. You misunderstood. It's really a deficit. It's not really a true problem. It's a great way to avoid criticism. And it actually even flips the table on you by making you feel guilty for expecting them to be better or different. And it makes you more likely to be supportive or understanding, kind of even to receive the feedback that you're not being supportive enough because they see this as a problem. I mean, they're defining it as a neurological problem instead of a personality characteristic. So number two is that it helps them to avoid accountability. Number three, this is a great way to gain sympathy and control. Narcissists are able to not say, I'm the person in charge here who's manipulating everything. Instead, it flips them into the seat of, I'm the victim. I need special help. I need special resources because of my social disabilities. So that puts them back into the victim seat, which then really actually gives them more control and puts them more profoundly in the driver's seat because it gets them sympathy from you. It also gets special treatment from other people. It repositions themselves as the misunderstood party. So it makes people hesitant to call them out or to set different boundaries. And it shifts the focus away from the toxic behavior and instead on their perceived struggles. So now they're now the one who's in the one down position, even though you're actually being negatively impacted by them. So let me review the first 3 points. It helps them excuse harmful behavior, it avoids accountability, and it gains sympathy while also gaining more control. Number 4 is it legitimizes social difficulties, but without admitting deeper issues. So narcissists don't want to take a good look at themselves. They don't want to own that they see themselves as superior, that they believe they're entitled to special treatment, special resources, and that they are emotionally detached. They don't want to own any of that. They don't want to own that they have character deficits in their very personality. Instead, they want to frame this as a neurological condition, not as an interpersonal failure, but rather as a condition, as a problem they can't help themselves. So by making you believe that it's inherently a neurological difference and not really a lack of care or accountability, really helps you to not see them as the person who's sort of socially creating the situation. It really helps, gets you to miss the bigger picture by legitimizing the difficulties. And number 5, it's a blurring of the lines of autism and narcissism because they're fundamentally different. So yes, there's some overlapping traits in the way that they sort of show up, but when you look at the intent behind what's happening, you see that they vastly differ from each other. And it really deflects the reality of the issues that are stemming from their manipulation and the exploitation. And instead of really illuminating things, it just confuses everything, and it gaslights you into doubting your very experiences. So here are some key differences that I want you to begin to look for that tells you the differences between narcissism and autism. So remember, autism is a developmental condition that someone is born with. Has inherent neurological deficits. They're either like hypo or hypersensitive. They also have often social cue problems. There's sometimes a neuromuscular like clumsiness and kind of implications with their physicality. Like, for example, autistic people tend to be quite clumsy. And they also have a lot of sensitivities, and not just sensitivities to our senses like sound, light, and how things taste or feel, but also even sensitivity to pain reception. We can be hyper or hyposensitive to these things. That's very different from a narcissistic personality disorder, which is a characterological disorder. Yes, also it's something that somebody, I believe, is born. It's not usually made, although it can be worsened over time. But narcissistic personality disorder is a disorder that has to do with a way of relating to the world and relating to self and relating to other people. And it tends to be characterized by incredible entitlement, an attitude of superiority or difference from other people that we often call grandiosity. There is a root of jealousy where they perceive that life is unfair, that they should have all the good stuff and the other people shouldn't. There's also a practice of deception and a practice of manipulation. And there's an empathy problem where they really struggle to have a sense of how other people feel and being reflective about that. And they're not good at self-reflection, so they really struggle looking at themselves, seeing how they're problematic, and then learning from it. So I just kind of gave you a definition of each, but let's break them down by categories so that you can see the differences side by side between an autistic individual and a narcissistic individual. So let's take empathy and emotional connection first. An autistic person is struggling to read social cues, and they may have deep empathy once they understand a person's feelings, but they may miss the nuances that go on in the room. As an autistic person, I can tell you that when I was growing up, I could read the emotional feelings in the room. Often I would be overwhelmed by people's anger or the intense sadness, or maybe even just the stress in the room. But I often didn't always know why. And one of the ways it really showed up for me was I would struggle making friends. I felt like there was some code book out there that everybody got to know how to have these interactions. And I just couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. Like, what do I say when, and how do I talk about myself in the beginning? And when somebody says something, do I make a compassionate comment, or do I bring it back? I just couldn't figure it out. It was like I said, like everybody had been downloaded some sense of how to handle this, and I never got it. So I just came off as awkward and really struggled making relationships. So we can seem at the time like we're emotionally detached, but it often is because we're feeling uncomfortable, or, oh, thank you so much for that gift, uncomfortable, or maybe we're just not sure what to do next. So we're feeling like sort of awkward, or even kind of, kind of dumbfounded in the moment. And so it's not really an emotional detachment, like I'm not connected to what's happening. Often we feel very powerfully what's happening, but we don't know what to do next because we're struggling to really know how to navigate the situation. And when we find out we've been awkward or done something wrong, and I cannot tell you the number of times that I would say too much or I'd be too blunt, and then there would be this big backlash. In fact, I'd often say I have this habit of putting my foot in my mouth. I would even tease and say I have foot and mouth disease as a way to sort of joke about it. But I would be so crushed when I found out that I blew it, that I was really hurtful or harmful to somebody when I didn't mean it. I just didn't realize that I wasn't reading the cues well, and I was being too upfront. Now, how does narcissism look different? That's a perspective on autistic, how it is emotionally and empathically. Like, I always understood what was going on to people. I mean, how could I be a psychologist if I don't have a sense of what's happening inside of you and how it would feel to be you, and even to read your emotions in the room? I do that pretty well. But I may not always know the right things to say. And then you would say, well, how do you get to be a psychologist? I know I haven't changed to narcissism yet, but here, how can I be a psychologist if I'm struggling with emotional sensitivity and emotional cues? Well, because I got a lot of training. That's one thing. Also, because I've made it my life to study people and try to understand what's happening, because I was struggling to understand what's happening. But also because when I'm in the room as a clinician, as a psychologist, as a therapist, in that moment, I'm put in the position of an expert and I'm controlling the room. So that makes the rules a lot clearer. I'm to show up, be empathic, look for insight, help people figure out the next step, look for blockages, why they're not able to take the next step, to make them feel emotionally safe, help them feel like like they can be themselves. See, all of these structures were giving me the sense of how to handle social cues. So it's interesting that over time, as I've gotten older and more skilled, I've managed one-on-one relationships quite well. I don't think people recognize that I used to have a disability there, that it used to be extremely difficult for me. But where I start to fall apart is you put more people in the room. So the more people that are in the room and the more group dynamic happens, then I start to get overwhelmed because I can't manage it all so well. That's where I start to struggle, because my disability is overwhelming me and making me feel awkward and clumsy again. So the same feeling I used to have on one-on-ones, I now only really usually have when I'm in a group setting. So I'm not a lot of fun to be at a party. All right, so how does narcissists How does that show? How does empathy and emotional connection happen with narcissists? So narcissists actually struggle with emotional empathy. They may know what you're feeling, but they don't connect with it. So that's why they're so good at using your emotions against you. It's actually what's called instrumental empathy. They have empathy. It's not that they don't know what's happening inside of you. They do. They register when you're angry or when you're sad or when something makes you feel insecure, but they don't feel a connection to it. They're not really concerned about you when that happens. Instead, they're looking at how can they take advantage of that. Now that they know something upsets you or makes you hurt or sad or insecure, they're looking to the advantages of it to exploit it against you. They're also, they themselves, because they're not connected to you nor care about you at a compassionate, like deep emotional level, they don't have an actual depth to them. So what they're doing with you is emotionally mimicking you. They're mimicking your responses. Have you ever noticed? I saw this with my ex, and I thought it was really odd because, again, like I said, I'm always watching people because of my own social difficulties. What I would notice is that he would have over the top emotional reactions to things. Like if I found his old pictures of when his kids were little and made a copy of it and framed it, he would like cry and be so excited about that, so touched. And I'm thinking, adult people don't react like that. That's odd. I mean, it was sweet and touching, but I also found it a little like strange. Well, that's because he didn't actually care that I did that. He's not connected to that son. So it wasn't that relationship was all that impactful to him. And he doesn't really understand why I'm doing it, but he knows that's the right thing to do. He's mimicking the emotional response, which is why it sat weird with me, because I was picking up there's something that was somewhat inauthentic about it. So the other thing that they do is they don't feel guilty and they often will fake remorse in order to manipulate or escape consequences. Whereas autistic people will feel really guilty when they realize they've hurt you. And then they don't attempt to manipulate you. They just feel kind of, you know, they feel like dumbstruck. I guess that's the best way. Sort of like, oh my goodness, I did it again. I can't believe I did it again. I don't know what's wrong with me. So that's the differences on empathy and emotional connection. Is autistic people are struggling to read the room but are very empathic. They can seem detached, but they're really not. Whereas narcissists actually don't care. They don't have genuine concern. They're mimicking you to seem genuine, and they're also faking the remorse. All right, so let's take social interactions and relationships and look at how autism and narcissists differ there. So autistic people may struggle with all the hidden social rules and nuances, but we're open to learning, and often we work really hard to get better at some of this because it is having an authentic, deep relationship with somebody is really important to us. And in fact, it's so important to us because a lot of our lives we spend as outsiders, we're very loyal. Even though we may express difficulty showing our care and concern, we're extremely loyal. And often you're going to notice that we apologize a lot because we realize that we step on people's toes. We don't always know how that we stepped on people's toes, but we really want to genuinely make it up and make it right. In fact, when in my earlier years, I would say up into my early 20s, I would end up losing relationships and not knowing why. My girlfriends would just disappear. And I wouldn't know exactly what I'd done to cause that. And unfortunately, they weren't open to coming back and giving me feedback. I was really interested. Now, granted, it would have been crushing, but I could have heard it and I would have liked to have learned from it, but I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I just knew I was doing something wrong. Now, interestingly enough, a narcissist, they're very aware of the social rules. In fact, they're going to be the first person probably to send you that Mother's Day text or Happy New Year's text. They're often like feeding the social connection with you, but they're doing it for the ability to weaponize and manipulate you, to keep the relationship so-called warmed up so that it's possible to get another advantage with you or to circle in and ask a favor from you, because narcissists form relationships that are very transactional. So they're looking for validation, for control, and for status. I saw this all the time with my ex. In fact, this is one of the feedback that he gave me about myself. He would be the first to announce anything new in our life. Like if I got an award or something big happened or the fact that it was a holiday or whatever, he would be sending out mass groups of texts to people, wishing them whatever, like Happy Mother's Day or Happy New Year's or Merry Christmas or whatever. Mass, I mean, like tens of people, like maybe, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 people. I don't know, a lot of people. I didn't do that. That's not a typical habit of mine. I wouldn't even think of it, because one of the things actually both people struggle with, both types, autism and narcissism struggle with, is object constancy. But we struggle it for different reasons. Narcissists struggle with object. But you know what object constancy is? It's the ability to recognize a person exists when you don't see them. That's kind of like the blunt nuts and bolts meaning of it, and it shows up in babyhood. It's when your baby starts to chase after you, crawl after you, and you leave the room and cry. That separation anxiety is the first indication that the baby realizes, oh, people can leave. They can actually walk away, and when they walk away, they continue to exist, but they're just not with me. And when you start to see that, you're like, oh, object constancy is being developed. Well, with autistic and narcissistic people, we both struggle with that, but for different reasons. Autistic people are sort of like top of mind. I don't really know how to describe it. I'm trying to just give you a sense of it from what it feels like for me. So if I don't think of you or haven't seen you, I may not remember to connect with you, even though you're very, very important to me. I have to sort of always, in fact, what I love with the text messages now is that you can create bubbles of people who are important people and put them at the top of your contact list or your text, like your iMessage list. So I'll look at that and I'll remind, oh yeah, I haven't spoken to so-and-so in a while. I miss them. I wonder how they're doing, because if I don't see it, I'm not reminded. And if I'm not reminded, I may not think to reach out, which then, is it a wonder why some of my relationships kind of died? I mean, because I'm not very good at that. Now, narcissists do it, but not because they're remembering you, but rather because they want to exploit and manipulate you. So that you're not very present in their mind either. They're only present in their mind. They're just trying to think of, sorry, they're just trying to think of the best way to utilize this relationship. But so they don't remember you in the sense of you're an important person who they care about or have a continuing sense of connection with you. It's just for their sake of benefit. So my ex saw me not do that. I wasn't sending out these mass texts to people on holidays or birthdays, and he would say, I don't know how you have any relationships. And I would look at him and think, I don't know why anybody would think your shallow, like, wishes of Christmas or whatever matters, because to me that's like, there's no depth to that. So you did that. That doesn't make me feel connected. But isn't that interesting that how he observed me and I observed him, and that we were both like shaking our heads at each other. So narcissists are more transactional, and they're looking for validation, control, and status, and that they will avoid responsibility. So whenever something kind of goes wrong, you're going to either get a deflection of blame, that like they're going to defend themselves or twist it on you and use Darvo, make you the problem, or you're going to get some kind of insincere apology with all sorts of excuses. I know you guys have heard it, like, I'm sorry you felt bad, or I'm sorry I made you feel that way, or I'm sorry I disappointed you, instead of like, I'm sorry I did whatever XYZ that they did that was harmful. So let me review it again, just because I covered a lot in that one. Social interactions, narcissists are struggling because of the difficulty learning and improving, and because just socialization is hard, but they are very concerned and invested in the relationship, and they're very loyal because relationships mean a lot, and often because they are viewed as outsiders. Whereas narcissists, they're using the connections for exploitation, like what they can get out of you, because relationships are transactional, not reciprocal. All right, the third way they're different is the way that communication and honesty is held or dealt with. I'll tell you, this is a big one. This is where I got in trouble and how my autism got weaponized against me. Autistic people tend to be extremely honest. Partly is because we use language in a literal way. You may have heard of that, where we have a literal interpretation of language. So if I said to you, it's raining cats and dogs, those of us who are autistic, we tend to, in our mind, see raining cats and dogs, and then have to tell ourselves, no, that's not what they mean. They mean it's just raining really heavily. But you may even watch us flick to the window to check if there's actually cats and dogs falling from the sky, even though we know that's improbable and not going to happen. But we have to literally filter ourselves through that process and say to ourselves, no, it means something else. So we can miss some of these kind of sayings, or I find them funny. When people use those types of sayings, sometimes I'll laugh just because the imagery is funny, and I know that's not what you mean, but it just gives me, I don't know, it's funny. So we're extremely honest, and we're really struggling to kind of filter ourselves socially. So we often may say things that are not quite accurate, but yet we're so concerned about the accuracy. I don't even know how to describe it because it's ironic. I don't know if you've noticed that I'm very careful about what I say and how I say it, and it bothers me when I say it wrong. And I often know that because I speak super fast, that sometimes my words will get ahead of my head, and that I'll say things wrong and later like, why did I do that? But I tend to be quite careful because I don't want to misuse words or misconstrue something. So again, it's because we're literal. We kind of like try to follow all the boundaries super careful. And because of that, our criticism is hard because we're trying to improve and we know we have deficits and we really want to do better. But here's how it differs with narcissism. Narcissists lie frequently because they like to manipulate the truth. In fact, I think they think that the truth is actually optional. That you haven't earned the truth. The truth isn't yours to have. They get to filter what they want you to know because they almost, at least the one I was around, acted like the truth was something that to protect. Like only he got to know what reality was, and the rest of us needs to live in his curated version of the narration of the reality he wanted us to think was happening. So he would lie over the most bizarrest things to me that I didn't even find. Why would you go to the effort? Because now you could get caught in that, and you're gonna have to remember that you said that. Like he would tell a friend when he or I were out that that we were in a meeting or something. No, we weren't. So if his friend followed up and said, "How did that meeting go?" He's going to remember that he was not in a meeting, but he said, you know what I'm saying? I never understood it. To me, it felt way too much effort and too convoluted. I didn't get it. But they often will use communication as a way to gaslight people, to make people question their reality. And when you call them out on something, you're likely to get a lot of rage and defensiveness because they experience criticism as personal attack. You're actually, in their minds, at that moment, you're actually saying you're superior to them by having an opinion on what they did. So then that they react defensively because that's an attack. How dare you be superior? No, they're superior. So in that moment, they flip the tables on you. So again, the difference is autistic people are blunt. We're extremely honest. We tend to say too much. We tend to say things a bit on the unfiltered side. But we're not doing it with the intention of manipulation, and that when we get criticism feedback, we're very sensitive to it, and there's no like defensiveness. It's just often feeling awkward because of that. Narcissists, on the other hand, are deceptive. They extort reality. They use gaslighting to do that, and there's a lot of defensiveness if there's criticism. All right, the next one is self-perception versus ego. So for an autistic person, our identity is a struggle because we struggle to sort of articulate who we are and what we're about, but it's not about hierarchy. It's not about being superior over other people, and we're not really looking for special treatment. In fact, actually, when I get called out on it, that my autism may be impacting what's happening in the relationship, I feel awkward because I don't want special treatment. I just want to be like everybody else. So it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And also just because at times it takes me a long time. I know this is something that we don't talk about a lot, but I have what's called alexithymia. Have you ever heard of that? That's a difficulty knowing what I'm feeling. So often for me, it can take upwards to a week for me to figure out what a interaction made me feel like what's all my parts and pieces to whatever's happening. I have to take a long time figuring out, am I hurt? Am I sad? Do I feel betrayed? Am I feeling like I'm vulnerable? Am I ashamed? It takes me a lot of time to sort of process that through. And because of that, then I'm really slow to being careful and protective of myself. Whereas a narcissist has a very inflated sense of themselves. They just sort of feel like they're above and not like others. And yet, this is the ironic part. You would think because they need all that constant validation and admiration that they're super actually insecure. No, they're not. They think they deserve it. They want that recognition because they're their biggest fan and they want you to be their biggest fan. They expect you to be their biggest fan because they expect special treatment, because they see themselves inherently better than other people. And as a result, then they don't see themselves as at fault. In fact, when something goes wrong, it's because of something happened. They didn't do it, you did it, or the circumstances did it. So they're always like shifting the story, shifting the narrative in order to avoid responsibility and accountability. So again, the differences between the two is autistic people do not look for special treatment. They do not feel like they're better than other people. They may feel like outcasts or outsiders, but they don't feel better. They just feel different. And they're very readily admit mistakes, except for when they get really rigid in thinking. Like maybe there's a particular word that they've used and you're saying, no, you didn't mean that, but like, well, but that word means that, and they'll fight you over that word meaning or over whatever particular thing, but it's because of the rigidity in thinking. Whereas a narcissist just has this really inflated ego that needs a lot of validation and expects special treatment and doesn't see themselves as at fault. All right, so the next one, and this is the last differences between the two, is intentions versus motives. Autistic people are struggling in relationships because of social misunderstandings, sensitivities that are sensory sensitivities, and difficulty with emotional expression. So they often will say blunt things or hurtful things without intending it. And here's another thing you're also going to notice about them is they really prefer predictability and routine and structure for comfort, not because they're trying to control of other people, but rather they're trying to control their sort of the way that they feel about their life and the way they're interacting with the world around them. For example, with me, I do have a schedule every day. I go into that day knowing what the schedule is, and please do not change it on me at the last moment. I do not deal well with that. I feel very dysregulated and out of control because I kind of in my mind have sort of built this up that this has to get done today, whether it really does or doesn't. I know it's arbitrary sometimes. It doesn't feel that way to me, but when somebody kind of comes in and throws a wrench in, I get really upset, not because I'm trying to control the other person's schedule, but because I'm feeling so out of control and dysregulated inside. That differs a whole lot from a narcissist who is all about control and manipulation and doesn't really care about how they're impacting you. And they're actually intentionally trying to harm you in order to be one over you or to be superior to you. And they're willing to belittle, manipulate, and dominate in order to have that control because they want to feel superior and they want to maintain the power and control. So, all right. So, how do we recognize when somebody's masquerading as an autistic person when really it's narcissism? Watch for a consistent pattern of manipulation. Watch for a lack of accountability and a lot of emotional exploitation. It's likely to be narcissism if you're seeing that. You're going to see them weaponize their victimhood and use it as an excuse to justify cruelty and selfishness. They're going to not be genuinely remorseful, but instead tell you that they can't help it as a way to justify hurtful behaviors. Now, I do know autistic people will sometimes say, I don't know how to do differently. It's really how I'm wired. But they aren't trying to justify harming you. They're just trying to justify their the literalness or the intense structure that they've applied to their life. Also, watch for strategic emotional reactions that are cluelessness when it's convenient, but really showing you a high social awareness in other situations. In other words, what I'm saying is autistic people are truly clueless in all social situations, not just in some of them, whereas a narcissist is more likely to weaponize cluelessness in some situations, but you're going to see them be very savvy in others. They show a high social or emotional awareness of how to weaponize that situation against the other person. An autistic person is invested in change. They genuinely want to improve things and understand what's going wrong, whereas you're going to see with a narcissist, no efforts to change, a lot of talk about maybe changing, but you're not going to see any real effort to change. Okay, so can they co-occur? Can someone be actually narcissistic and autistic at the same time? Absolutely. Here's one of the errors. This is one of the many errors I see us make about mental health conditions in general and personality disorders. We act like they're solo, like silos, like it only occurs here, and that if you have that disorder, that it locks out all the other disorders. No, that actually is not true. That's not how it works. You can have many conditions and disorders at the same time. That's actually quite normal. I would have people come in the office who might have borderline personality traits, would be severely depressed, and also struggling with anxiety. That's possible, totally possible. I might have somebody else who's autistic, has some narcissistic traits, and is quite anxious. Really a probable presentation, not unusual. Or I might have someone who's a narcissist because now they're at work being threatened with losing their position. This has actually happened. I'm thinking of somebody right now, was possibly losing their position at work and was having an anxiety disorder. Very possible. It's not uncommon to have that happen. So never assume that just because somebody has one condition that they don't have another condition. Sure, they absolutely can have another condition. So what does it look like, though, when you're both autistic and narcissistic? So let's talk about that, because that can happen, and I want you to know how to look for it if that's possible. Because maybe your partner or loved one does have both. So just a reminder, autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that's marked by social communication difficulties, sensory sensitivities, and a deep need for routine and structures. There's a whole host of other things that go with it, but you can just kind of generally think of it in those big buckets. Narcissism, on the other hand, is a personality disorder. Oh, thank you so much, guys, for that. I appreciate that. Narcissism, on the other hand, is characterized by manipulation. It's a personality disorder, which means a chronic, a persistent style of relating to others and self that is deficit and problematic, which is characterized by manipulation, entitlement, lack of empathy, poor self-control, poor self-reflection, and a lack of reciprocity in relationships. So that's going to be really different from the typical autistic profile of a person who's super honest and emotionally sincere. And thank you guys so much. Several of you guys are giving gifts today, and I really appreciate that on YouTube as well as TikTok. That really touches me. I know this is a big topic. I was really upset about it, honestly, when I started seeing it happen, that narcissists were saying, I'm not really a narcissist, I'm an autistic. And when I got really upset was when a so-called psychologist, and I'm not for sure she's ever practiced, you now know she's a woman, but I'm not for sure this individual's practiced, but she's been coming out and she actually has a video that says, your partner is not narcissistic, they're autistic. And I'm like, what? What is she talking about? And as an autistic person, I just felt like, wow. First of all, I'm not like narcissist in any way at all, so I was offended by that. And I also felt deeply concerned because one of the things we could get into today is that I really fully believe the autistic community is in direct line of attack by narcissists, that we're often groomed and targeted. In fact, in my membership of Toxic Free Relationship Club, a lot of people in that club are also autistic. Now, it could be because I'm attracting them as an autistic host, but it also could be because it's happening to so many of us. So that, to me, that's very alarming. We're often hurt by them, not one of them. So, okay, so what is a typical presentation of both autistic personality disorder and autism spectrum disorder? So they can co-occur, but what you're going to see is a rigid thinking with a very black and white worldview. Because autistic people already see things in a very black and white because of our literal thinking, we have kind of difficulty with nuance. When you combine that with narcissism, you're going to see this rigidity weaponized in order to assert dominance and control. So look for the rigidity being weaponized to assert dominance and control. And they're going to refuse to compromise and see only their perspective as the valid one. Your perspective will never be valid. So again, imagine the worst of these two qualities coming together, the literal predictable need for structure and the literal use of words, along with the superiority and belief that their way is the best way. And imagine seeing that combination happen together. You're also going to see social struggles mixed with manipulation. So Like I said, unlike autistic people who struggle with social norms and don't exploit them, the autistic person with narcissistic traits is going to manipulate other people while also having great difficulty with social reciprocity. So they're going to use their awkwardness as an excuse for aggression, for excessive control, and other hurtful behaviors. They're going to justify it as they can't help themselves. You should make special accommodations for them. You should just understand this is who they are. I've actually seen it in the comment sections when somebody really disagrees with me and is being abusive, that they'll swing in and they'll say, I can't help that I'm harmful. Like, yeah, you can. You can just stop doing it. So when you see that odd combination of justification and cruelty mixed with rigidity and just kind of like the difficulty connecting with others, that may be a sign that you've met somebody who's autistic who also has narcissistic traits. There's also a hyperfixation with status, intelligence, or their uniqueness. They're going to see themselves as exceptionally superior, especially in the area of special interest. Like they're going to believe they're unmatched when it comes to whatever it is that they're excessively focused. Like they're the best when it comes to equestrian indulgences. They're going to know everything there is about horses, or they're the golf expert. There's no one like them. They're unmatched in their understanding of golf. So there's this sort of this hyper focus of a passion, but then they believe they're superior to everybody else. Like, for example, take me. My hyper focus is psychology. No surprise there, I'm sure. But you know what? I know where I stand in the world. I know that there's a whole lot that I do not know about psychology. I would never claim to be the expert. If anything, I'm so literal about my limitations, I'm likely to underplay what I know instead of elevating what I know. So watch for that combination of fixation with superiority. They're also going to believe that they're entitled to special treatment, but now special treatment about the disability because they feel like they need accommodations. So when they're co-occurring, they're going to be demanding constant accommodations with little concerns for other people's needs. And they'll even go to the extent of exploiting the system. In other words, you're going to see them weaponize their diagnosis to get what they want while disregarding its impact on other people, or even the fact that their struggles isn't unique to them. It's common being shared with everyone who has neurodivergent issues. That's a big one. Really watch for that. They're going to, you know how we have that typical meme of a Karen? That's what you're going to see. You're going to see somebody that's like goes out and above and beyond to say they deserve this to the neglect of everybody else. So pay attention to that. That's that entitlement for special treatment when it's just extreme. I'm not talking about those who are actually defending for the right to get some treatment. I'm not talking about that. I know that happens, but we're talking about to the disregard of the struggles or the difficulty they're asking people to go to. Number 5, you're going to see a lack of genuine empathy, but it's kind of masked as blunt honesty. Autistic people are very blunt, but they tend to be well-intended. They're not aiming to be hurtful to you, but an autistic person with narcissistic traits is going to use the bluntness as an excuse for cruelty. I can't help that you took it wrong. I'm just telling you the truth. They'll disguise their lack of emotional empathy as just being direct, and they don't care if they hurt you. They only care about how it affects them, not how it affects you. And then you're going to see a meltdown and narcissistic rage blended together. Can you imagine that? So when an autistic person melts down, it's because of sensory overload and frustration, and it's not directly at manipulating anybody. If you ever see me at the end of the day when I've been overwhelmed and overstimulated, I often will have a headache, like a bad one, like my skin hurts, my body hurts, because I call it introvert hangover is what I call it. But I'm not trying to get anything from anybody. I actually just want everybody to leave me alone so I feel better, because if I could just have quiet, I'll start to feel better. Whereas, and just to kind of review, a narcissistic rage is whenever there's a perceived threat to somebody's ego, and it could be slight. You may not even know that you've insulted them. Like, say, for example, they're trying to share something with you and they're going on kind of long, so you interrupt them. They could take that as a narcissistic wound and be enraged, and they'll respond by becoming vengeful, explosive, and controlling to get you back. So imagine the combination of those two, though, someone with both. So you're going to see somebody who's very has meltdowns, but it's explosive and it's around perceived injuries to their sense of self. It's going to be the worst of both. And then the way in which an autistic person with narcissistic traits is going to appear that's different is that they're not self-reflective and they don't seek personal growth. So autistic people are very open to getting feedback and wanting to improve relationships, whereas a narcissistic person is going to double down, refuse to admit mistakes, and really blame for other people. So an autistic person is going to, with narcissistic trait, is going to claim victimhood and have no self-reflection. So be really, really aware of that. So I want to say the combination, and thanks again so much for that. I appreciate the gift on YouTube. I'm right now can't see the comments, so I don't know who it is, but I really appreciate that, guys. So here's the thing: co-occurrence of both autism and narcissism is not common. It's uncommon. But if it happens, you're going to see a blend of social rigidity, superiority seeking, and manipulative tendencies. Autistic people are not naturally narcissistic. In fact, they're deeply honest, they're very loyal, and they're very uncomfortable with deception. In fact, for me, deception is so unthinkable that until I met that toxic person, it actually hurt me to tell a lie. Like I'd feel physical pain to tell a lie. I don't know how I couldn't imagine living a life like that because it was so physically uncomfortable for me. So when I met him and realized his entire personality was a lie, the person I met didn't really actually exist. I'm like, I don't know how you exist. Like, how can you cope with that? Aren't you uncomfortable by that? So autistic people are just naturally really deeply honest. And in fact, that's where we get vulnerable because we're easily duped because of our honesty. We don't assume people are being dishonest and we take you at face value because we tend to be face value. So it's a really great way to exploit us, unfortunately. So when you see someone who's using autism as a form of manipulation and controlling behavior, be more concerned that maybe you're seeing a possibility of a co-occurrence, that maybe they are autistic, but maybe they're also narcissistic, that maybe they're both happening at the same time. Not common, but possible. All right, thank you so much, guys. So now we're going to take your questions. So what is it as you are been listening to me talk, and it doesn't even have to be about autism or narcissism, but what kind of questions are coming up for you that you would like me to address? And I'm going to try to see all the screens now so I can see what everybody is saying. Yeah, I agree. The deception is the grossest disrespect. I do agree. It's very, very painful when there is deception. Yeah, and on TikTok, deception and deceit, my undergrad killed me on this because I learned how often and frequently it's occurring. Yeah, when you're autistic, the idea that people are walking around not telling you the truth is truly, truly like shocking. I just couldn't imagine that people live like that, that was a possible. I mean, I get afraid of being called out for not, even when you mention like, where's the reference to something, and maybe I don't have the reference at hand or can't find it. I get all worked up about that. That's really important to me. So I just can't imagine just sort of saying whatever I want off the top of my head. Nicotine Stain is asking, so mention narcs again, understand the social contract. Yeah, narcissists tend to be very, very good at what's called mind mapping. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Mind mapping is the ability to get into another person's head and anticipate what it is they want to hear, and then feeding them some version of that. So that's actually when you start to learn to lie, is because you've learned to be able to mind map. So think about a 4-year-old who's telling his parents, no, I didn't eat that last cookie. That means he has to know I'm not supposed to eat the cookie. They don't want me to get into the cookie jar, and the eating that cookie is a problem, and they really want me to say that I didn't do it even though I did do it. So they're having all this sort of like ability to do that. That's interesting. Schema mapping. I don't know what that is. I'll have to look that up. So mind mapping is something that's discussed by David Schnarf, Schnarch, Dr. David Schnarf. And so when you're able to do that, you're able to feed other people what they want to hear. Autistic people are struggling to do that because they tend to be literal. So we're not tend to reading in behind what people, we're having a hard time reading the social cues in the first place, although we sense the emotional atmosphere in the room. But to know what somebody wants to hear and to tell them that, and then plus we're so literal, it's like a violation to ourselves because of the literalness. It's just super uncomfortable. But yeah, it was mind blowing for me to discover that I had basically got into a marriage I love that, Stephanie. Somebody's got to eat the last cookie. It's stunning to me to get into a marriage and find out that my partner had lied about everything, that it was a secret double life that he was leading. I don't even know how he was. I mean, he looked exhausted. I could tell it was taxing him a whole lot, but it was wild. So depression, narcissism, and autism. Do we have a chance to rebuild the broken misunderstanding? Can you say more what you mean by that, Lisa? I'm not exactly for sure what you mean by that. And thank you so much, Harmony. I appreciate you. If you guys notice on YouTube, Harmony's name is in green. I have a subscriber called Super Thriver. It's the top subscription level for $6.99 a month, and it gives you immediate access to all the exclusive interviews as a subscriber. So if you're interested in hearing people like Bill Eddy, Dr. Les Carter, Dr. Peter Salerno. There's over 45 videos that are available to Super Thriver subscribers on YouTube. So yeah, be sure to check it out if you're interested. I agree, Aubrey, is that toxic behavior is often excused as neurodivergence. And that's why I really love this interview that I had this week with Erica Little Heron. She goes by basically Linda Belcher on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So if you're interested in hearing her discussion, because she really does a very deep dive. In fact, she says her hyperfocus is narcissism, and she's an autistic woman. So if you really want to understand more about the differences between the two of them, be sure to check out this week's podcast on on breaking free from narcissistic abuse. Yeah, I research a lot. Instead of saying whatever comes into my mind, I tend to overthink and overanalyze, and it gives me time to breathe. Yeah, it does. I agree. That's how I approach myself too, or that I tend to really like think things through what I'm saying. When I was younger, I used to rehearse a lot. I would like practice what I was going to say before I said it. So yeah, for me to imagine having this really double life, I can't really quite fathom it. It's mind blowing to me. Um, well, I'm so sorry to hear that someone over on Instagram has just broken up with somebody highly manipulative and feeling pretty decimated. That's terrible. Healing from a narcissistically abusive relationship, I have to say, is brutal. It's just brutal. Um, yeah, Lacey, I'd be happy to talk more about that for more feedback. So please, let's talk about it in group. So for those who are not aware, I have a group called Toxic Free Relationship Club, where every week there's 4 weekly live group coaching that happens. You also have direct access to me. If you get into a pinch, I'm even open to calling you if you need a call. We also do a recentering group for helping you re-regulate your traumatized nervous system. We do a book club. There's all sorts of resources. So if you're interested in that, please check out. Yeah, thank you so much, Aubrey. Check out the Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can get a hold of it in a couple different ways. If you want financial assistance, be sure to talk to me directly about that. I'd be happy to help arrange that for you. It is shocking, but I agree with you. A lot of you, when I meet you, I don't know if you guys know, I offer discovery calls as well. So if you're not for sure, hey, you want more help, but you're not for sure what kind of help, you can get a discovery call with me. But one of the things I found was shocking was that a lot of you in a discovery call will say to me, I've become an expert on this. I've now have my own PhD in narcissism. I bet you do, because when we get out of these relationships, we're so rattled by what happened that we need to really pause, step back, and take a long look because of the ways in which they got into our heads and really helped us lose a sense of ourselves. And I know people will say, well, it's just a matter of bad boundaries. You just didn't hold your boundaries. No, it's that they made boundaries almost impossible to hold because they don't apply the same rules of civility and hospitality that we're used to. We kind of learn to communicate with each other indirectly. So like when you're getting close to my limits, I know enough to like, whoa, I can tell that's sensitive, I'll back off. But a narcissist won't. They'll actually put you right in the direct spot of being uncomfortable in order to make you give in because you can't stand living with yourself as sort of a cruel, hurtful person. So they're very good at weaponizing your discomfort against you, which makes boundaries extremely difficult to hold. Because basically, in order to hold a boundary, you have to be willing to be hurtful, blunt, cruel, almost feel unempathic, like you're violating your own sense of integrity in order to protect yourself. That's what people really don't understand about boundaries. Yeah, so somebody is saying again, they don't really, this is on TikTok, they don't really allow boundaries. If you were raised by one, you've really struggled to learn that. I agree. Have you heard of Echo Chamber, the Echo Chamber? She's on Instagram and TikTok. She also is on YouTube. She's got a small YouTube channel. But if you've been raised by a narcissist, you've learned that boundaries are not possible, that your whole life is to be submerged for the benefit of the other person. And that's called echoism. We don't have enough content on us, which I'm so thrilled that Lynn is out there talking about echoism. So if you want to learn what is it, are you struggling with it, be sure to check out the Echo Chamber on, and I think it's on TikTok or Instagram. It's called the Echo Chamber. It's 2025 or something, like 2024, something like that. Yeah. When people want to harm you, yeah, boundaries don't matter. I agree, they don't matter. They really don't matter. So it's a big one. Here's the thing we need to start watching out for. People often ask me, what red flags did I miss that maybe I should have picked up on in that initial relationship or that initial meeting? They probably tested your boundaries and you didn't know about it. And it probably was something so subtle that you thought you were just being nice, and to say no would have felt weird and maybe a little like blunt. And so you didn't want to do that because you didn't want to come off in a bad light on that first date. But what you didn't realize was that compromise of yourself meant that it could get you to compromise other parts of yourself as well. And when I look back on that first date, I can see many times where I was kind of put into an uncomfortable position. And because I just didn't want to seem as uncooperative, I didn't want to seem like I wasn't like a good like team player. I went ahead and went along, when really what I realized now was that it was actually him taking advantage. He was testing me, seeing if I could be made vulnerable. Hey, John, thank you. And first of all, it's wonderful to see you back today. I really appreciate that feedback. I'm glad this was helpful. I love doing these. These are really a lot of fun for me. So I like to learn more, and it's really a great way to talk about these really timely topics. In fact, to let you know what's coming up ahead, because I do this every Tuesday, next week is going to be about sexual intimacy. So it's going to be a tricky one to navigate with Instagram, social media, all social media. But we're going to talk about how to know when it's intimacy healthy versus intimacy not healthy. So really kind of like notice that. I'm sorry, I'm reading my comments now. So we're going to be talking about how to recognize unhealthy physical intimacy boundaries. And another one we're going to get into, because here's a common one. A lot of men will say, I'm feeling abused because there's not enough intimacy in the relationship. And women will say, no, I'm being coerced. I'm being forced to be physically intimate when I'm not interested. So we're going to talk about when is it abuse and when is it actually coercion. We're going to try to find that delicate line between coercion and abuse, because it can happen, you swing one way or the other, it's going to be harmful. It's going to be hurtful. So we'll try, and I've experienced both sides of it. I've had somebody be coercive, and I've also experienced withholding. And I'll tell you, they're both brutal. So let's get into all of that. So I think my autistic ex is chronically dysregulated and anxiously attached. That's common. Autistic people can be quite dysregulated and really struggle to know how to connect well safely to other people. I know that for me, that's been a really big lesson for me to have to learn when I got out of these relationships, is how to manage myself and know that I'm okay, and that other people, because you lose so many relationships, you start to think that something's wrong with you. So it's really hard when you're having social problems and connecting to other people. I would recommend that if he's not a narcissist, and I'm assuming you're a woman talking about a man, I would really urge you to maybe think about getting special help for the two of you to learn how to connect to each other better. That may be really helpful to the both of you. Any last questions? I'm kind of trying to see if there's anything else that comes up before we wrap it up. Facebook has been very quiet, only one person over there, so apparently this was not a rich topic for them. And on Instagram, I don't know how many people I have on Instagram, but you're pretty quiet over there too. So any last questions before I wrap it up today? But I love this today. Thank you so much. I don't do one-on-one counseling these days. I do this extremely rarely. I mostly do group work these days. So if you are looking forward to that, I would say the biggest way to really work with me is to look for Healing Strong this fall, which I will open up for fall enrollment in the summer, or to join me with Toxic Free Relationship Club, where I do 2 coaching sessions a week, and then Lisa Sunny also does 2 coaching sessions a week. The best way to get a hold of me, guys, and you all can use this information. I really like this email is for you, and that is to contact me at hello@kerrymcavoyphd.com. Again, that's hello@kerrymcavoyphd.com. Well, I'm so glad to be back with you guys. I was actually suspended from TikTok Live for 3 days due to a person's handle that was a very provocative handle that I said out loud and got dinged for hate speech. But anyway, I'm thrilled to be back here today and thrilled about all the interest in this topic. So I will look forward to joining you guys next week, Tuesday, when we get into physical intimacy. When is it abuse and when is it actually just withholding? All right, you guys, take care. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you soon.